Welcome to the Oral History Podcast, featuring stories from the oral history website voicesofoklahoma.com, where Oklahomans have given generously of their time to tell their life stories for present-day listeners and for generations to come. Our entire collection is available on the website voicesofoklahoma.com. Subscribe to be notified of new Oklahoma oral history podcasts. Here's another interesting storyteller from voicesofoklahoma.com. Richard Dick Willhour graduated from Will Rogers High School and enrolled at the University of Tulsa. When World War II began, he joined the Army and was attached to the 100th Infantry Division as a machine gunner. Upon his return from military service, Dick's father told him to write about the experience, and so at 99 years old, that script was helpful in telling his story. The chaos of the battlefield, the loss of comrades, and being wounded in service to his country are all told in a humble way. And even in his 99th year, Dick was of service to his church, handing out snack packs to those in need. He owned Pennant Petroleum Company, which was a DX Sunoco jobber. Dick was 99 when he died November 1st, 2024, but you can hear his voice as he talks about the Oklahoma Land Run, his preparation for war, and the loss of 4 company commanders on the battlefield. On the podcast and oral history website, voicesofoklahoma.com.
My name is John Erling. Today's date is May 7th, 2024. So, Dick, would you state your full name, please?
Richard William Willhour.
Your date of birth, please?
12/10/24.
That makes your present age?
99.
And obviously you'll be 100 in December. Where are we recording this interview?
In Trinity Woods.
Here in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Right.
I looked up what happened in 1924, the day of your birth. Black Gold, Kentucky Derby winner. The 50th running of the Kentucky Derby happened in your birth year. Republican Calvin Coolidge was elected president November 4th of that year, and Jimmy Carter was born in October of your same year, and Jimmy Carter is still living. So those things happened the year you were born. Your mother's name and her maiden name?
Her maiden name was Alla Ruth Wynn, W-Y-N-N.
And where was she born and raised? Where did she grow up?
She grew up in Texas as a youngster, and then they moved to Oklahoma, to Tulsa. I don't remember what year, but they lived at 510 North Cheyenne for a good many years.
What was her personality like? What was she like?
Well, she was, I'd say, quiet. I don't, of course, know how wild she was growing up because I wasn't here. But
right. Quiet personality?
Yes, yeah.
Your father's name?
Ralph Willhour.
And where was he born and grew up?
He was born, I believe, in the panhandle of Oklahoma at Beaver City, I think.
Did he grow up there then? Is that where he lived?
Yeah, that's where he grew up, as far as I know.
What was his personality like?
Well, Dad was very quiet. He was a well-liked man, had lots of friends.
What did he do for a living?
He was a pharmacist by trade and was in the First World War as a medic. And with that background, he became the superintendent of the first aid at the Mid-Continent refinery. The refinery is still there. His job was to take care of all the injuries that occurred from the Chilean workers that were in the refinery.
Where is that refinery?
It's on, you just go down 17th Street and cross the river, and you're in the
Right there. Yeah.
housing addition where I grew up. And it's right there by the refinery gate.
Yeah, mid-continent. Did you have brothers or sisters?
Yes, I had one brother, younger.
Is he still living?
No, he passed away about a month ago.
Oh, what was his name?
Robert.
Mm-hmm. So how old was he when he died?
He was 93.
So since you're 99, did your parents live for long?
Mom died at 99, and Dad was, I'm pretty sure he was 83.
I ask this question because sometimes nationalities come. What's your nationality?
German.
Okay. Yeah.
The story is that two German brothers came over prior to the Revolutionary War. One of them was in the Revolutionary War and didn't survive. And as far as we know, there's all kinds of spellings of the name Willhour.
So those two that came over from Germany, are they your bloodline? Is that where you trace your?
Yes.
Well, let's talk about your grandfather. What was his name?
Well, I got two grandfathers, of course. One was Richard Watson Wynn, and the other was William Henry Willhour. And William Henry was sort of an adventurist. He was in both the land runs in Oklahoma. During his lifetime, he owned a hotel in Kansas. He had an interest in land and mine. He ran a drugstore, owned a drugstore in about every town they lived in. Because of that, my dad got his pharmacy certificate. And when my grandfather finally moved to Tulsa, went to work for the Tulsa Police Department and was a detective on the police force for several years.
Your father?
My grandfather.
Grandfather, okay, yes. So that would have been approximately when?
I'd say in the early 30s, or late 20s and early 30s.
Did you know him? Did you meet him?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember him coming to the house, and when he came in, he would pull the biggest six-shooter I ever saw out of his pocket and lay it on the table.
And his name again was?
William Henry Willhour.
Did he tell you some stories about police work in Tulsa?
I don't recall any.
Your grandfather came in and was involved in the land run?
But yes, he came to Oklahoma and the land run.
So he received land then? Did he?
Well, the first run he was in, he came to the most beautiful quarter section he had ever seen. He got off his horse and was driving his stake in the ground when turned around and say looking down the barrel of the biggest six-shooter he ever saw, and did get a section of land, but it was too close to the lake out there where it's saltwater. The land had too much salt water in it to be good farmland. So he traded that and went somewhere else. And then when the next round came, which I think was in 93.
1893.
Yeah. He got a good piece of land out close to Beaver City. His wife, my grandmother, was a school teacher out there. Where you got a picture of them in a sod schoolhouse that he built, and my dad's in it, and several sisters, with about 20 other kids.
And where was that location again?
Right out of Beaver City, Oklahoma.
So that first run, when that barrel of the six-shooter was looking at him, he left, gave it up.
Yeah, they run him off.
They were brave people, weren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine doing what they do.
No. And then when they get the land, then there wasn't anything on it, and they had to either dig a hole in the ground, a cave or something to stay in. They had to build on it.
Yeah, they had to build some kind of a house. And I guess it was customary to build them out of sod.
A sod house?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't really know that they lived in one, but I know the schoolhouse was a sod house.
Yeah. Well, more than likely they lived in that. So was your dad born there?
I'm not sure where they lived when he was born, but in the picture we've got of his mother, my grandmother, in front of the schoolhouse, and he's about 3 years old. So he was born out there somewhere.
We really respect those people and the strength they have. It's amazing. Your parents met then in Tulsa, is that true?
Yes. My dad had a buddy he hunted with, and Pete Wynn. He introduced him to my mother, and they eventually got married.
Let's talk about school. You went to grade school in Tulsa?
Yes, I went to grade school, went to Riverview for the first 4 years, then the family moved. Then went to Sidney Lanier, and then Woodrow Wilson. And then about that time, Will Rogers was opened up, and I was in the first graduating class from Will Rogers.
Oh, what year was that?
42.
You graduated in 1942.
Yeah.
The Depression from 1929 to 1939, do you have any memories of Depression and how it affected your family?
No, I don't know. I didn't know I hadn't been born long enough to know what it was not to be in a depression, I guess.
Right. And then we had the Dust Bowl days about that same period of time.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any stories.
I remember reading about it, hearing about it, talking about it.
Okay, what I'm going to do right now is refer to, you wrote out your story, and it's called My War. Why did you write this out?
Well, when I got home from the service and was telling my dad all about it, he said, you better make notes of everything that you want to remember, because you think you'll remember it for years, but you won't. So I made notes, and then later wrote them, put them together into a story.
Yeah, and I have it here. I mean, if there are 10, 12 pages here of single space, it's enormous writing of what you've done. So I'm going to use this as we go along. You start out here talking about December 7th, 1941. That was a Sunday. Can you remember what was going on? What were you doing then?
I don't remember what we were doing. I remember we had just gotten home from church and we're having lunch in a little breakfast room in our house, listening to a little radio when we heard them declare the war on Japan.
And you wrote here it was a Sunday, and the next day at school, they had us all go into the gym to listen to President Roosevelt declare war. And that was at Will Rogers High School. When you listen to the president and his declaration of war, Do you remember what kids were talking about? Was that a pretty frightening moment?
No, I don't think we were old enough to know what was going to take place.
And as you wrote here, you said, I was only 16, about to become 17. Some of the older guys went down the next day to enlist. One was named Richard Schindler. He was a senior, and in 3 months he was dead, killed even before he would have graduated. You still weren't old enough to really grasp it all, could you?
No, I'm sure we didn't understand exactly what was going to happen to us.
So you were so young then, of course you couldn't enlist, but then after your graduation from Will Rogers, what happened to you next?
I went to TU, study an engineering school, was there when I was drafted.
But you say then at TU, there were only about 600 to 700 students on the campus. You also wrote here, you went to engineering school, and then you wrote, big mistake.
Yeah, I had all the mathematics I could stand.
An Air Corps training unit took over the only dormitory on the campus. Jim was, class required during the war years was military calisthenics. Played a little touch football, there were always recruiters on the campus, and you didn't apply. You took a mini physical for the Army Reserve, they turned you down. So kind of talk to us about how you eventually got in to the military.
Well, I was technically, I guess I was drafted, but they came up with a program called ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program. And you could enlist in that. They'd send you to college. First you went to basic training, then you went to college. And you studied either medicine or engineering. When they called me, I went in, and I believe it was January 3rd of 1944 that I went in.
But you had a bad eye?
I've got one eye that just, when I was born, it wasn't as strong as it should have been, and it still isn't. Because of that, I couldn't get into any officers' candidate school. But they did get into ASTP program and was called up, went to Camp Chaffee, Arkansas for basic training. I didn't really want to stay in engineering school, so I asked to take the test for medical school and was accepted and was going to go to medical school until our Army decided they needed replacements and infantry more than they needed schoolboys. So they closed down the ASTP program and sent all the kids to infantry somewhere. And I was sent to the 100th Division in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and ended up in the Heavy Weapons Company of the 3rd Battalion of the 397th Infantry, part of the 100th Division.
A little side note here. About the last week of March, you were loaded on a train and headed toward Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to join the 100th Infantry Division. On the way, someone on the train came down with mumps, and so the whole train was quarantined. For how long?
Well, I don't really remember, but it wasn't very long.
Oh, it looks like it says for the first 30 days we were there, we were put in empty barracks and had to stay by ourselves, and that you have written here.
Yeah.
And you took turns cutting each other's hair. You were put in the first squad of the first platoon of Company M of the 397th Infantry. M Company was a heavy weapons platoon. So talk to us about your experience there.
Well, the heavy weapons platoon consisted of 2 platoons of heavy machine guns, heavy being water-cooled, just the same 30 caliber machine gun that ordinary infantrymen carried. But this one had a water jacket around the barrel to keep it cool enough that you could consistently fire the whole belt of ammunition. I was the number one gunner. I carried the tripod with a machine gun, which weighed 51 pounds. The number two gunner carried the gun, which weighed 42 pounds, without any water in it. The number three man carried a gallon can of water and a box of ammunition, each weighing about 20 pounds. And all the rest of the guys in the squad carried two boxes of ammunition, a belt of two belts of ammunition, 120 rounds in a belt.
So then you were preparing to go overseas. What was going on and where did you go?
We went to a camp in New Jersey. I can't remember the name offhand. I don't remember the dates we boarded ship, but it was sometime in October, I think, after the invasion of Normandy and D-Day. And the invasion of Normandy was in June.
Yeah.
And we got over in October, the 100th Division. We landed in Marseille, I believe it was.
Yeah. It says you've written here, you came into the harbor at Marseille about 6 o'clock in the evening, October 20th. It was filled with scuttled German ships. All you could see was the top of the mast sticking out of the water. Our ship could not get close enough to dock the ship, so they anchored offshore and we climbed down cargo nets, landing craft. It was just like you see in the movies. So you can tell more about that. The difference was they weren't shooting at you.
Yeah. After we got off the boat into the harbor, we marched about 10 miles to a campground. And it seems like the only thing I can remember from that was a lady standing on the balcony of her house waving an American flag.
And you wrote here, it says record of the Star Spangled Banner was being played.
And she also was playing the Star Spangled Banner while waving the flag.
Man, that must have given you a good feeling.
It did. It did.
And this was in France, of course, Normandy, right?
Yeah, we'd been in France for very few hours.
So when you got to that camp, what happens to you then?
Well, we pitched tents. Can't remember how long it was before we actually were committed to the line.
So then you write, you had a trip to the front. You left early in the morning of October 30th. Tell us about your convoy, what it was made up of, and that experience.
Well, I don't know. I don't actually recall how many days or hours it took, but it didn't take long before we were bivouacked right outside the line and committed the following day.
The German army had retreated by this time.
Had run the Germans back quite a ways, but we had, up to that point, no problem whatsoever with infantry, with enemies.
So the second day, the second night, you camped in a park.
When we were in the park, it had a stone wall around it, and the wall had a hole in it. It happened right close to where we pitched our tent. We couldn't go out. We weren't allowed to go out. French people weren't allowed to come in, but several youngsters and their parents or guardians came to the hole in the wall, and we attempted to talk to them, but I didn't. None of my friends knew any French. I had a semester of Spanish in high school. One of the kids standing out there spoke Spanish, so we tried to have a conversation in Spanish, but I didn't know enough that we could have a very extended conversation.
Yeah. What about the food, the C rations that you had?
They had two types of rations, C rations and K rations. The C rations consisted of 6 cans. That was our whole lunch. You got it in the morning if somebody in a Jeep could get close enough to you to bring them. Otherwise, you didn't have any. And you carried those rations in your field jacket. You ate the first one, of course, and carried 5, and then C rations were 3 cans of meat that I'll swear smell like Vigo that I fed my dog every day.
Mm-hmm.
They were meat and cheese combination, and a better ration from our point of view was the K ration. It consisted of 3 boxes, one for each meal. They had a small can of some kind of meat, and also they had a package of 5, I think, cigarettes. Anyway, the K ration was the best one we preferred, but we didn't have any choice. It's just whatever they had handy, and if a Jeep driver could get close enough to give it to us.
Got to remind our listeners that you are 99 years old and you can still remember all those details. That's pretty amazing. You write about your pistol belt. What did you have on your pistol belt?
On our pistol belt, we had, well, if you were armed with a pistol, and heavy machine gunners were, you had your holster on your belt, you had a trench knife, and you had issued hand grenades, and so you hung those on your belt. That wasn't any other way to carry them.
So what was it your job then, to stop the enemy?
The machine guns were always attached to a regular infantry rifle company. When they got stopped, we would dig in. I say dig in, we dug a hole for ourselves so that you could sleep there.
But the enemy did engage you a long night, and 8-man patrol came through about dawn, and one of the guys had his helmet hit right in his forehead.
He had a bullet hit right square in the middle of his head. It hit the helmet, a steel helmet, but for some reason, the bullet circulated between the plastic helmet and the steel helmet, and exited out the back. A freak deal that saved his life.
And shook him up pretty much.
Yeah, sure.
All of you, probably. And so you were on this roadblock for a day or two, and then you moved a mile down the road, set up another roadblock. On November 14th, 1944, you moved out early in the morning. Do you remember engaging the enemy?
can't help but remember being shot at. I don't think they were aiming at me particularly. They were just firing in our direction. You can't help but remember that.
Were you firing your weapon?
We, when we were moving, couldn't fire it because it had to be set up, basically to make roadblocks so the enemy couldn't get down the road.
You say here your regimental commander was killed when his Jeep driver took a wrong road. They ran into a German machine gun.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah, I remember hearing about it.
So at the end of the day, you were in pretty sad shape.
Well, our regimental commander, battalion commander, company commander, and platoon leader had all been either killed or hurt bad enough that they couldn't perform. And
Well, that's amazing. All those leaders were killed, so they were up there in the front.
well, they were, somewhere in the area. And
But were many of your other soldier friends there or were killed as well around you?
oh yeah, we had some guys that were lost, but all the ranking men for our regiment, platoon leader was the first guy, then captain, then the battalion commander, then the regimental commander, then the division commander, and they were all put out of commission the first day.
So then the rest of your soldier friends there, I mean, were you thinking, became kind of fatalistic? This is it? You knew you could lose your life soon?
Well, yeah, you knew that from the beginning. If somebody is shooting at you, and German artillery was firing pretty consistently all the time. They had a gun called an 88 millimeter, and it was supposedly the best field piece in war, better than what we had. You could hear that shell coming, and it wasn't long. When you heard it, you hit the dirt and got down. But it wasn't long before you could tell from the sound whether it was coming close enough to hit the dirt. I was in combat, actually, I think a total of 6 months. And was digging a hole, and when the artillery started coming in, I didn't have it very big. When I heard it coming close, I got in as much hole as I had dug, and got hit in the foot and ankle with a tree burst, or a shell hit a tree that I was under, and it didn't hurt very bad, but it kind of numbed my foot. It was the same shell or the same groupish. Anyway, I got hit again on my knee, but it just hurt. It didn't. It was very spent shrapnel, and it just slapped my knee and didn't penetrate or hurt anything. But it hurt more than the one that actually was in, because the shrapnel that hit me, that actually got in my foot, was a little piece of, looked like a timing ring off of the artillery piece, but the whole piece was only about the size of a .22 shell.
And you're now, how old are you now, about now, when this is happening?
How then?
How old were you then, yes?
Well, that was 1944.
You were 20 years old.
20, yeah.
Those of us who've never been in combat were just amazed by your story. and I guess you're kind of numb to everything that's going on, that your life is at stake.
I guess so, because you couldn't do anything about it.
But to be in combat for 6 months, that was a long time.
Yeah, it was. 6 months is a long time, period. But there were a lot of guys that were in a lot longer and they had it a lot worse than I did.
At the end of 6 months, were you brought back, or why were you brought out of the combat?
It's because I was hit and went to the hospital.
Okay, now I didn't realize that, because you just said, well, it didn't hurt that bad, but you did have to go to the hospital.
Yeah, I had it penetrated it went in, the shell went in just below my ankle and ranged forward in my foot for a few inches. So when they operated, I had an incision about 4 inches long, bottom of my foot. But before long, it started draining, seeping. Anyway, it was infected, and it was going to have to be opened up again because when they got the shrapnel out, they left some of the wool from my sock in the incision. They had a rule: if you're going to be hospitalized for 120 days, then they send you home. It wasn't worth keeping you over there.
So you'd been hospitalized for how long?
I don't remember exactly how long it had been, but when the infection showed up, it had been long enough, and plus what they were going to have to do, there would be more than 120 days, so they sent me home. It was a wound called the $1 million wound. It got you sent home, but you weren't hurt bad enough that it was going to make any difference in your life.
You still have a scar there in that ankle?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's all right. Yeah. With you forever. So how did you look at that? It was painful to go in the hospital and have the surgery and so forth, but did you think, well, it got me out of combat?
Yeah, I'm sure it did. I'm sure it was a whole lot better to lay in a hospital bed than
In a bunker someplace,
in a hole in the ground.
being shot at.
Yeah.
Yeah. So probably saved your life.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah.
Very, very easily could.
Were you awarded the Purple Heart?
Oh, yeah. It's just automatic. If you're wounded, you get the Purple Heart.
Any other awards that you received?
The Combat Infantry Badge.
Mm-hmm.
Every guy that is in the infantry and in combat got that.
Yeah.
Didn't do anything special.
But do you know, those of us who are listening to you know how special it really was? It was special. And when you think about it, the fact that you were fighting them over there and not over here.
Looking at it that way, it was special.
Yeah. But anybody who was in combat, you were taking fire and you were even wounded. It's a pretty amazing story. And I'm sure you've been thanked. You've been thanked many times, I would imagine, when people know you're a war veteran.
Well, I've got a couple of caps with the insignia on them.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of people that say thanks for your
Good.
service.
Good. I make sure I do that too when I see veterans wear those caps.
Yeah.
Yeah. And preserving the freedoms we have today.
It's been so long that you'd have to be close to 100 years old to have been in it and still be alive.
Exactly, right. Let's talk about your wife. What was your wife's name?
Margaret Brown.
Where did you meet Margaret?
At First Christian Church.
Downtown Tulsa.
Yeah. Her parents and her family were members of First Christian. One of her grandfathers was one of the early ministers of First Christian.
Yeah.
My dad, and I don't know how he joined or why he joined, but he was a member when I was born. My mother was a member of Centenary Methodist. Why they put me or went to First Christian, I don't know. That's what they did. Most of the people I knew very well, they were from the church.
Mm-hmm. And then you and your wife had how many children?
I had 3. We lost one, we lost the first one. We had a girl and a boy and another girl.
And what are their names?
Susan Lee and then Richard Jr. and then Sandra Kay.
Do they live here in Tulsa?
They all live here. They are the best kids you could have. They come to see me regularly. They buy or pick up or anything I need. My son, who lives on a ranch, I guess you call it a ranch, he raises cows on the farm anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I buy Inola. But every Wednesday, he comes in and takes me down to First Christian, and we feed the homeless.
Oh.
The idea for feeding the homeless came from a lady that was a person that greets you when you come in the door during the week. I mean, she worked for First Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Her husband and I were friends, and so when it was her idea that we needed to feed these people because she knew what they wanted when they came in, that she was close to the front door. So they started this program, and every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 11 to 12 served a meal. Just all, when the guys come in off the street. But that was prior to the what do you call it?
COVID.
Prior to that. After that, then we started doing it with putting the food in a sack. Come by and pick up a sack at noon. And so for 6 years, Bill Osteen and I, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, passed out food to the people. Unfortunately, Bill died about 2 months ago, and the church had changed things. Instead of having us or somebody doing every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I just got a permanent person on Monday and Wednesday and Friday, and that's all you did.
Yeah.
So my son comes in from Inola and picks me up and takes me down to the church.
So you still do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I still go every Wednesday. I actually enjoy it because it gets me out of here.
Yeah.
It's kind of boring here.
Yeah, that's good. A little bit about when you came home and all. What was your profession? What did you get into?
As I said, I didn't want to be an engineer. When I went back to TU, I enrolled in marketing, got a degree in marketing, went to work for a guy named Jim Countryman in Countryman Oil Company. He had been a salesman with Stanlin Oil and Gas, or Standard Oil, who, didn't have anything in Tulsa. But he moved here and he became what they call a jobber. And he sold Standard Oil products to service stations or anybody to buy them. So I went to work for him. A year or so later, he retired and I bought his company. It wasn't a big deal. And so then for the next 20 years, I guess, I was an oil marketer, selling gasoline to people that didn't, I mean, they weren't salesmen. They had their own pump, tanks, and sold oil, Quaker State oil.
Let's take you back into the 40s, 50s. Cars. Did you have a favorite car?
The first car I ever owned was a 47 Packard convertible.
Wow, that's a pretty classy car.
Yeah, I wished I still had it.
Yes.
It'd be worth a fortune.
Yeah. Beautiful car, though.
And Packard made a 6-cylinder and an 8-cylinder, and this was a 6.
Downtown Tulsa, then. What do you remember about downtown Tulsa and some of the stores and movie theaters?
I worked when I was in high school. I worked for Harrington's.
Harrington's Clothing?
Yeah, Harrington's Clothing. Every afternoon, we went to downtown and worked for a couple hours, and then all day Saturday.
I remember the name Gladys Harrington.
Gladys was Lee Harrington's wife.
Okay. Harrington's was a good reputation, a good store.
Oh, it was a good store. I miss him. He had good, solid people working for him.
Did you go to movies downtown Tulsa?
I had the Ritz and the Orpheum and the Rialto were the main theaters in those days. Went to the movies downtown. Vandiver's and Brown Duncan were the two main stores downtown. Penny's had a down store.
What about the music? You remember first music that you listened to or enjoyed?
I get a kick out of Lawrence Welk nowadays because they played some of the music that was popular when I was in high school.
Well, then there was Glenn Miller and Benny Goodman.
Yeah, Glenn Miller was the orchestra in those days, as far as I was concerned.
Did you listen to the radio then, back then?
Yeah, I had radio.
Remember which radio station you might have listened to? Or?
Well, it was KVOO and KTUL were the main stations.
I'm going to read, this talks about VJ Day, victory over Japan, August 15th, 1945. And you were 21 years old, probably in the hospital then. Well, as we've heard you talk about the war, more than 400,000 Americans and an estimated 65 million people worldwide died in World War II. Historian Donald Miller wrote in his book, The Story of World War II, says, quote, "It was too much death to contemplate, too much savagery and suffering, and in August 1945, no one was counting. For those who had seen the face of battle and been in the camps and under the bombs and had lived, there was a sense of immense relief."
I don't remember writing that. I hadn't read it. And
the war was over.
yeah, the war was over. I remember being relieved, and when Japan surrendered, and knowing that I wasn't going to go. As long as they were fighting and you were in the Army, there's a chance you was going to be sent somewhere.
Yeah.
And,
But you didn't get in on some of that victory stuff because you were in the hospital, wasn't it?
I didn't go to any victory parades.
Yeah. I interviewed one man, Frank Riesinger. He had Riesinger Jewelry in this town, and he was home. He'd been in the military and was home, and then he would happen to be in town when VJ Day happened in the celebration that happened here in Tulsa.
Yeah.
Broke out in the streets downtown Tulsa. This has been very interesting.
Well, I'm glad you think so.
Yeah. What kind of advice would you give to young people who are starting out in life or what have you? Do you give any advice to people? By the way, how many grandchildren do you have?
I've got 7 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren, and the only girl grandchild is pregnant, going to have a baby in August. The only thing that's going to keep a name going if she has a boy.
Okay, yeah. And again, you'll be 100 in December.
Yeah, and this is an old goat.
How would you like to be remembered?
Well, as being honest, stood straight, walked straight, shoulders back and so forth.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for this time and feel like I need to be thanking you and above all Americans for your service to your country and the life you led. It's very, very admirable. Thank you.
Wasn't anything special. There were lots of guys that did more than I did. I thank you for thinking what I had done was worth
I do.
reporting.
And those who listen will think the same. Thank you, Dick.
Thank you, sir.
You earned your keep.
You have been listening to the Voices of Oklahoma podcast, stories taken from the oral history website, voicesofoklahoma.com. At the website, you will discover an array of storytellers. Many you will know. Some will be new to you, but all will be worth your time. This work depends on listeners like you, who are interested in learning about the great people of Oklahoma. Our website provides an opportunity to donate to this 501c3 project, which preserves Oklahoma history, one voice at a time. voicesofoklahoma.com.